My hands shake as I adjust the blanket across my lap for the third time in 5 minutes. The burgundy wool feels soft beneath my fingertips, a small comfort against the storm of butterflies threatening to escape my chest. I chose this cafe specifically. Wide aisles, accessible tables, a corner spot where my wheelchair won't feel like it's blocking everyone's path. The afternoon sun streams through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors, and I tell myself this is a good sign. Everything looks warmer in this light, including me, I hope. 63 years old, and I'm nervous about a first date like I'm 16 again. The irony isn't lost on me. My daughter Sarah set this whole thing up, bless her meddling heart. "Mom, you can't just stay home with your books and crossword puzzles forever," she'd said last month, hands on her hips in that way that reminded me so much of myself at her age. Mr. Peterson from my yoga class just lost his wife last year. He's a retired teacher, loves to read, and Sarah says he makes the best lasagna in 3 counties. I'd rolled my eyes then, but here I am now, wearing the blue cardigan Sarah bought me for Christmas and the pearl earrings that belong to my mother. My lipstick is fresh, desert rose, the same shade I've worn for 20 years, and I've sprayed just a hint of lavender perfume at my wrists. Old habits, I suppose. Even though everything else about dating has changed since the stroke 2 years ago, some things remain constant. The accident, I still think of it that way, though the doctors called it a massive stroke, changed everything in the span of 6 minutes. 6 minutes to go from dancing in my kitchen while making Sunday dinner to waking up 3 days later with my left side refusing to cooperate and my speech slurred like I've been drinking. 6 minutes to divide my life into before and after. Before, when I walked my dog Charlie every morning. Before, when I could drive myself to the grocery store without needing to call Sarah. Before, when the idea of dating again seemed impossible simply because I'd been married to Robert for 38 years, not because my body had become a stranger to me. Robert. Even now, 3 years after losing him to cancer, his absence feels like a missing limb. Some mornings I still reach across the bed expecting to find his warm shoulder, still catch myself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter. Grief, I've learned, doesn't follow a schedule. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle lapping at the edges of consciousness, sometimes tsunami-sized and overwhelming. Today, it feels more like a quiet tide, present but not threatening to pull me under. A young couple at a nearby table laughs at something on their phones, and I smile despite my nerves. The cafe bustles with the usual Saturday afternoon crowd, college students with laptops and oversized coffee cups, mothers with strollers navigating between tables, an elderly man reading a newspaper while methodically working through a slice of apple pie. Normal life continuing around me, and for the first time in months, I'm part of it instead of just observing from the sidelines. I glance at my watch, 2:47 p.m. He's supposed to be here at 3. Sarah showed me his photo from her yoga class directory. Silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of face that looks like it smiles easily. James Peterson, 70 years old, taught high school literature for 43 years before retiring. Lost his wife Margaret to Alzheimer's 18 months ago. Has 2 grown sons and 4 grandchildren. Enjoys cooking, reading mysteries, and, according to Sarah, gives excellent advice about tomato gardens. My phone buzzes against my purse. A text from Sarah. "How are you feeling, Mom? Remember, just be yourself. He's lucky to meet you." Just be yourself. As if I know who that is anymore. Before the stroke, I was Ruth the librarian, Ruth the wife, Ruth the mother who baked cookies for every school fundraiser and hosted elaborate dinner parties where friends lingered at our dining room table until midnight. Now I'm Ruth the woman who needs help reaching books on high shelves, Ruth who can't feel the left side of her face when she smiles, Ruth who drives a specially equipped car and transfers from wheelchair to restaurant chairs with movements that still feel clumsy and uncertain. but I'm also Ruth who survived. Ruth who relearned how to hold a pen and write thank you cards. Ruth who figured out how to make her famous beef stew using kitchen tools adapted for one-handed cooking. Ruth who still laughs at bad movies and cries at weddings and reads 3 books a week because stories remain the one place where everything makes sense. I'm scrolling through my phone, pretending to read messages to calm my nerves when I sense someone approaching the table. My heart lurches into my throat, and I look up expecting to see James Peterson's kind, bespectacled face. Instead, I see Michael. The phone slips from my fingers and clatters onto the table. 45 years collapse into nothing, and suddenly I'm 18 again, wearing a yellow sundress and waiting for him to pick me up for our first real date. Except now his dark hair is silver white, lines map the corners of his eyes, and he's standing there in a navy cardigan and khakis, holding a single white rose and looking as stunned as I feel. "Ruthie," he says, and his voice cracks slightly on my name. The nickname no one has called me in decades hits like a physical blow, sweet and painful all at once. I can't speak, can't breathe, can barely process what I'm seeing. Michael Donnelly, my first love, my almost fiancé, the man who broke my heart so thoroughly that it took 3 years and meeting Robert to trust again. Michael, who left for California in 1979 with promises to write every day and send for me as soon as he got settled. Michael, who kept those promises for exactly 2 months before the letters stopped coming and I learned from mutual friends that he'd married someone else. "I think," he says slowly, still staring at me like I might disappear, "there's been some kind of mix-up." My mind races through the possibilities, landing on the most obvious one. You're James Peterson?" He nods, sinking into the chair across from me without taking his eyes off my face. "I've been James Peterson for 25 years. Changed it when I moved back from California. Wanted a fresh start." His voice drops to almost a whisper. "I never thought I'd see you again." The cafe continues its cheerful bustle around us, but I feel like we're in a bubble, separated from the rest of the world by the weight of decades and the shock of this impossible coincidence. Or maybe not coincidence. Maybe this is what people mean when they talk about fate, about the universe having a plan we can't see until we're standing right in the middle of it. He starts, then stops, his gaze taking in my wheelchair, my face, the changes that 45 years and life's curveballs have etched into both of us. I brace myself for the pity, the careful, diplomatic words that people use when they're trying to be kind about difficult situations. "You look beautiful, Ruthie," he finishes, and his eyes are bright with unshed tears. "You look like yourself, only more so." Does that make sense? It does, actually. It makes perfect sense. And for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed 2 years ago, I feel seen. Not pitied, not handled with careful politeness, but truly seen by someone who knew me when I was young and fearless and believed the whole world was waiting for me to discover it. "I thought you were dead," I whisper, finally finding my voice. When the letter stopped, I didn't know what to think. He reaches across the table and covers my right hand with both of his. His skin is warm, slightly rough from age and work, and I remember suddenly how his hands used to feel when we were young, when holding hands felt like the most natural thing in the world. He says quietly, car accident, 3 months after I got to San Francisco, was in a coma for 6 weeks. When I woke up, everything was different. I was different. And by the time I was well enough to write, I thought you'd moved on. Thought it was better to let you think I was the bastard who just stopped caring than to drag you into the mess my life had become." The words settle between us like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into all the years we've lived without each other, all the choices made and unmade, all the what-ifs that I buried so deep I forgot they were there. My coffee has grown cold, but I don't care. The rose he brought lies forgotten on the table between us, and neither of us moves to pick it up. We just sit there, two people in their 60s, holding hands across a small round table in a busy cafe, trying to bridge a gap of 45 years with our eyes and the trembling recognition that some things, the important things, never really die. They just wait. I can't stop staring at him, cataloging all the ways he's changed and all the ways he's exactly the same. His smile still tilts higher on the right side. His eyes still crinkle when he's thinking hard about something. He still has that habit of running his thumb along his bottom lip when he's nervous, and seeing it now makes my chest tight with memory. Tell me about your life, I say, because I need to know everything, need to fill in 4.5 decades with stories and explanations. Tell me about your wife, your children. Tell me why you became James Peterson. He shifts in his chair, still holding my hand, and I realize he's nervous too. Good. It makes this feel more equal somehow. Two people fumbling toward understanding, instead of one person graciously accommodating another's limitations. Margaret, he says, and his voice is gentle when he says her name. I met her in the hospital during my recovery. She was a physical therapist, smart, funny, patient with stubborn men who thought they could heal faster than humanly possible. He smiles at the memory. We were married for 43 years. Lost her to Alzheimer's 2 years ago. The timeline hits me like cold water. 2 years ago, right around the time of my stroke. We were both facing our biggest challenges, learning to navigate loss and limitation, and we had no idea the other existed just a few towns away. I'm sorry, I say, and mean it. Alzheimer's is cruel. He nods, his thumb tracing small circles across my knuckles. The last 3 years were the hardest. She'd forget who I was, sometimes think I was an intruder in our house. But then she'd have moments, clear, beautiful moments, where she'd see me and smile and say, "There's my Michael." Those moments kept me going. You went back to Michael? With her, yes, always. She never knew me as James. I was Michael when we met, Michael when we married, Michael when we bought our house and raised our boys and grew old together. James Peterson was just the name on legal documents, something I needed for employment background checks and tax forms. But I was always Michael in the ways that mattered. I understand this completely. Names can be costumes we wear for different seasons of our lives, but underneath, we remain who we've always been. What about you? He asks. Sarah mentioned in her yoga class that her mother had been married. I'm sorry about your husband. Robert, I say, and it feels strange to speak his name to Michael, like introducing 2 different eras of my heart to each other. 38 years. He was a good man, kind, steady, made me laugh every day. We lost him to pancreatic cancer 3 years ago. I pause, watching Michael's face for any sign of judgment or jealousy, but I see only compassion. I loved him completely. "Am glad," he says, and I can tell he means it. "Am glad you found someone who deserved you." The weight of unspoken history sits between us. He's telling me, without saying it directly, that he knows he didn't deserve me all those years ago, that leaving without explanation, disappearing from my life so completely, was a wound he inflicted and has never forgotten. I'm not ready to forgive him yet. 45 years of wondering and hurt doesn't dissolve in a single afternoon, but I appreciate his acknowledgement. Tell me about the accident, I say, because I need to understand what happened to the boy who promised to love me forever and then vanished like morning mist. His free hand goes to his left temple, where I notice now a thin white scar running along his hairline. Drunk driver hit me head-on while I was coming home from work. I was delivering pizzas, he says with a self-deprecating laugh. 23 years old with a college degree in English, and I was delivering pizzas because it was the only job I could find that paid enough to cover rent and still save money to bring you to California. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was working, saving money, planning for us, while I was crying into my pillow and composing angry letters I never sent. He was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. The doctor said I was lucky to survive, he continues. Traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding. When I finally woke up, it was 3 months later, and I felt like a different person. Couldn't remember things, couldn't concentrate, had these violent mood swings. The therapist said it might improve with time, but they couldn't guarantee anything. So you decided I was better off without you? I decided you deserved better than someone who might never be whole again. You were 22, Ruthie. Beautiful, smart, with your whole life ahead of you. I couldn't ask you to tie yourself to someone who might never be able to support you properly, who might need taking care of instead of being the one doing the caring. I want to argue with him, want to tell him that I would have chosen him anyway, damaged or whole. But I'm 63 now, and I understand in ways my 22-year-old self couldn't, that love isn't always enough. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step aside and let someone find happiness elsewhere. Still, it hurts. The 22-year-old girl inside me who waited for letters that never came, who jumped every time the phone rang for months, who eventually stopped believing in fairy tales, she deserves to voice her anger. You should have told me, I say quietly. You should have let me make that choice myself. You're right, he admits immediately. I was 23 and scared and probably still not thinking clearly from the head injury. I made a decision that affected both of us without giving you a voice in it. I've regretted it every day since. A woman at the table next to us laughs loudly at something her companion said, and the sound breaks through our bubble of intensity. I realize we've been sitting here for 20 minutes, completely absorbed in each other, while the world continued around us. I also realize my coffee is stone cold, and I desperately need to use the restroom. I start, then pause. This is where it gets complicated with new people, explaining logistics, asking for patience while I navigate spaces that weren't designed for wheels instead of feet. But Michael seems to understand without explanation. Of course, he says, standing immediately. I'll wait here. He doesn't offer to help, doesn't hover or look concerned. He just accepts that I need a few minutes and trusts that I can manage. Such a small thing, but it means everything. I transfer from my wheelchair to the restroom and back without incident, though my hand shakes slightly as I reapply my lipstick in the mirror. The face looking back at me is flushed, eyes bright with emotion and possibility. I look more alive than I have in months. When I return to the table, Michael has ordered fresh coffee for both of us and is reading something on his phone. He looks up when I approach, and his smile is warm and uncomplicated. Better? He asks. Much. I settle back into my wheelchair and position myself at the table. Now tell me about your sons and your grandchildren and why you moved back here after all these years. He pulls out his phone and shows me pictures, 2 men in their 30s who look like younger versions of him, 4 children ranging from toddler to teenager, all of them grinning at the camera with Michael's slightly crooked smile. David and Christopher, he says, pointing to his sons. David's a teacher like I was. Chris runs a small construction company. The kids are, he scrolls through photos, his voice softening with grandparent pride. Well, they're perfect, obviously. I laugh, recognizing the tone. Sarah gave me 2 granddaughters. Emma's 15 and thinks I'm hopelessly out of touch with modern life. Lily's 12 and still thinks I hung the moon. I'm dreading the day that changes. It won't, he says confidently. Kids might go through phases of thinking their grandparents are embarrassing, but they always come back to knowing we're magic. We spend the next hour trading stories about our families, our careers, the small victories and large heartaches that have shaped the decades since we last saw each other. Michael tells me about his years teaching high school English, how he eventually became the department head and started a creative writing program that sent dozens of kids to college on scholarships. I tell him about my 28 years as a librarian, the community literacy programs I developed, the way books became bridges between me and people I might never have known otherwise. I always wondered if you became a writer, I admit. You were so good with words when we were young. Your letters were like poetry. He blushes slightly, something that surprises me. The teenage Michael I knew was cocky about his writing, sure he'd published the great American novel before he turned 30. I tried for a few years, he says, but teaching was more fulfilling. Getting kids excited about reading, helping them find their own voices, it felt more important than adding another book to the world. There's never another book in the world, I say firmly. Every story matters. Every voice adds something. He studies my face like he's memorizing it. You still believe in the power of stories? More than ever. Stories saved me after Robert died, saved me again after the stroke. When I couldn't trust my body to work the way it used to, I could still trust books to take me anywhere I wanted to go. The afternoon light has shifted, casting longer shadows across the cafe floor. The college students have been replaced by an early dinner crowd, and I realize we've been talking for over 2 hours. It feels like minutes. I should probably go, I say reluctantly. Sarah's making dinner, and she'll worry if I'm much later. Michael nods, but neither of us moves to leave. The rose still sits on the table between us, slightly wilted now, but still beautiful. "Can I see you again?" he asks, and there's something young and uncertain in his voice that makes my heart twist. I know this is complicated. I know we have a lot of history to work through, but I'd like to try, if you're willing. I consider this. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to say no. We're not the same people we were 45 years ago. We've lived entire lives without each other, loved other people, built families and identities that have nothing to do with who we were together. Starting something now would be messy, full of potential for disappointment and hurt. But I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that life is too short for smart and safe when your heart is offering you something rare and precious. Yes, I say, and the word feels like a gift I'm giving both of us. I'd like that very much. He walks me to my car, moving at my pace without making it obvious he's slowing down. The adapted Honda Pilot sits in the accessible parking spot near the cafe entrance, and I feel a familiar flutter of self-consciousness about the ramp and the lift system that lowers my wheelchair to ground level. Most people stare, not unkindly, but with curiosity, trying to figure out how it all works. Michael doesn't stare. He helps me transfer to the driver's seat when I ask, then folds my wheelchair and loads it into the back without fanfare, like it's the most natural thing in the world. His movements are efficient but gentle, and I remember suddenly how good he always was with his hands, how he could fix my bicycle chain or untangle my necklaces with infinite patience. "Same phone number as the yoga directory?" he asks, leaning down to my open window. "Same phone number." I feel 17 again, agreeing to let a boy call me. "But Michael?" "Yeah?" "Take it slow, okay? This is a lot for both of us." He nods, understanding exactly what I mean. We're not kids who can dive headfirst into intensity and figure out the consequences later. We're older now, more careful with our hearts because we know how badly they can break. "Slow is good," he agrees. "I've waited 45 years to see you again. I can wait as long as you need." The drive home takes 15 minutes, but I stretch it to 25, taking the scenic route through downtown and around the lake. I need time to process what just happened, to let the shock settle into something more manageable. My phone buzzes twice with texts from Sarah, but I ignore them. Some things are too big and too fragile to share immediately, even with your daughter. My house sits at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a modest ranch that Robert and I bought 30 years ago when we thought we'd fill it with children. We tried for years, fertility treatments, specialists, one heartbreaking miscarriage when I was 31. Sarah came to us through adoption when she was 6 months old, a perfect miracle with dark curls and my stubborn chin. By then, we'd made peace with having just one child, poured all our parental energy into giving her everything we had. The house feels different when I roll through the front door, charged with possibility, like the air before a thunderstorm. I transfer from my wheelchair to the couch, something I can do easily now after 2 years of practice, and let myself sink into the familiar cushions that still hold the faint scent of Robert's cologne. I loved Robert completely. I told Michael the truth about that, but I'm realizing now that there are different kinds of love, different seasons of the heart. Robert was my steady ground, my safe harbor. With him, I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. He made me feel cherished and secure and beautifully ordinary. What I felt with Michael was different, electric, unpredictable, the kind of love that made me feel like I could do anything or be anyone. Young love, people call it, as if intensity is something you outgrow. But sitting here now, I can feel that electricity humming under my skin again, and I'm old enough to recognize it as precious rather than dangerous. My phone rings. Sarah. Mom? How did it go? I've been worried sick. You were supposed to text me as soon as you got home. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just got in. And don't make me drag it out of you. Was he nice? Did you like him? Are you going to see him again? I close my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain this to my practical, protective daughter who thinks she knows everything about my life. Sarah, I need to tell you something about Mr. Peterson. Oh no, he was awful, wasn't he? I knew this was a bad idea. These online dating things never work out for people our age. His name is Michael Donnelly. I knew him before I met your father. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean you knew him? I mean, I was in love with him when I was 22. We were engaged, or almost engaged. He left for California, and I never heard from him again. Until today. More silence. I can practically hear Sarah's mind racing, trying to rearrange everything she thinks she knows about my past. Mom, she says finally, her voice careful. Are you sure you're okay? This sounds like something out of a romance novel. I know how it sounds, but Sarah, it's him. After all these years, it's really him. Okay, she says, and I can hear her shifting into protective mode. Okay, are you at home? I'm coming over. You don't need to. I'm coming over, she repeats firmly. We need to talk about this. She arrives 20 minutes later with Chinese takeout and the determined expression she wore at age 12 when she was convinced I was making a terrible mistake. Sarah is 32 now, a successful marketing executive with her father's practical nature and my stubborn streak. She settled into the armchair across from me, still in her work clothes, studying my face like she's looking for signs of dementia or delusion. Tell me everything, she says, opening containers of lo mein and sweet and sour chicken, from the beginning. So I do. I tell her about meeting Michael when I was 18, about the 2 years we dated, about his promises and plans, and the way he made me feel like the most important person in the world. I tell her about the morning I woke up and knew something was wrong, about waiting for letters that never came, about the slow, painful process of accepting that he was gone. Why didn't you ever tell me about him? Sarah asks when I finish. Because it was over. Because I found your father and built a life with him, and looking backward seemed pointless. I pause, searching for the right words. Because some stories are too painful to tell until they have different endings. Sarah eats thoughtfully, processing. And now? What happens now? I don't know, I admit. We're going to take it slowly. See if there's anything left between us after all these years. See if we can be friends, at least. Mom, Sarah sets down her chopsticks and looks at me directly. You know this could end badly, right? You know he already broke your heart once, and you're not 22 anymore. You can't bounce back the way you used to. Her concern is valid, and I love her for it. But there's something she doesn't understand yet. Something you only learn when you've lived long enough to see how rare certain gifts really are. Sarah, when your father was dying, do you remember what he told me? He said a lot of things. He said, Ruth, don't waste the rest of your life being careful. You're too young to stop believing in surprises. He made me promise I wouldn't turn into one of those widows who just wait for their children to visit. Sarah's eyes fill with tears, remembering. Robert's final months were full of conversations like that, practical, loving preparations for a future he wouldn't share. This isn't about replacing your father, I continue. Nothing could do that. But maybe it's about honoring what he taught me, about love, that it's always worth the risk, even when the odds are against you. We talk until almost 9 o'clock, Sarah gradually warming to the idea once she understands I'm not making any dramatic decisions immediately. She wants to meet Michael, of course, wants to size him up and make sure he's worthy of her mother. I agree to this, knowing that Sarah's approval isn't necessary, but would make everything easier. After she leaves, I sit in my quiet house and let the day settle around me like a blanket. Outside, streetlights are coming on, and I can see Mrs. Patterson walking her little terrier past my front window. Normal life, continuing as always, while inside, everything has shifted. I think about calling Michael, then decide against it. We agreed to take things slowly, and that has to start with giving each other space to process. Instead, I get ready for bed, following the same routine I've maintained for 3 years, checking the locks, turning off lights, transferring to my bed with movements that have become automatic. But lying in the dark, I feel more awake than I have in months. My body might be tired, but my mind is racing with possibilities and fears and the strange sensation of remembering who I used to be before loss taught me to be careful with hope. 45 years ago, I fell asleep every night thinking about Michael Donnelly, wondering what our life together would look like, imagining the children we have and the house we'd buy and the way we'd grow old together. Those dreams died slowly, replaced by different ones with Robert, better ones in many ways because they were grounded in reality rather than fantasy. Now I'm wondering if some dreams don't die at all, if they just go underground, waiting for the right moment to surface again, changed but still recognizable, still capable of making your heart race in the dark. I fall asleep thinking about his smile, about the way he said my name, about the impossible coincidence that brought us together in a cafe on a Saturday afternoon. Tomorrow, I'll start figuring out what happens next. Tonight, I just want to lie here and remember what it feels like to be surprised by joy. I wake up at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before my alarm, which has been my pattern for 2 years now. The stroke didn't change everything. I still prefer morning quiet to evening chaos, still drink my coffee black, still think best with a pen in my hand rather than typing on a keyboard. But it did make me more aware of time, more conscious of how each day is a gift rather than a guarantee. This morning feels different from the beginning. Instead of my usual gentle drift toward consciousness, I'm immediately and completely awake, yesterday's events flooding back with crystal clarity. Michael. After 45 years, Michael. I transfer to my wheelchair and navigate to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar routine of morning preparation. Coffee first, always coffee first, then checking the weather app on my phone. Partly cloudy, high of 72 degrees. A perfect October day in Michigan, the kind of weather that makes you want to drive with the windows down and remember what it felt like to be young. My phone shows 2 text messages from unknown numbers, both received around midnight. My heart jumps, thinking it might be Michael. then settles into worry. Unknown numbers at midnight usually mean emergencies or scam calls. The first message makes me smile. "Ruthie, this is Michael. Sarah gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I couldn't sleep thinking about yesterday. Thank you for letting me back into your life, even for an afternoon." The second message, sent 20 minutes later: "I know you said to take it slow, and I will, but would you like to have lunch tomorrow? Somewhere wheelchair accessible, of course. I did research. M." I set the phone down, hands trembling slightly. Not from the stroke. That particular symptom affects my left side, and both hands are shaking now from pure emotion. He couldn't sleep either. He was thinking about me, about us, about what happens next. The careful politeness of wheelchair accessible, of course, makes me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. He's trying so hard to get it right this time. I text back, "Good morning, Michael. Yes, Sarah gave you permission to contact me. She also wants to meet you. Fair warning. Lunch sounds lovely. Do you know Luigi's on Main Street? They have a ramp and excellent soup." His response comes within 5 minutes. "Luigi's at noon? I remember you always loved good soup. And I'd be honored to meet Sarah. Fair warning, I'm nervous about it." "You should be. She's very protective. See you at noon." I spend the morning doing ordinary things that feel extraordinary because of their context. I shower and dress carefully, choosing clothes that are comfortable but flattering, dark jeans and a forest green sweater that brings out my eyes. I do my physical therapy exercises, the stretches and movements that keep my left side functioning as well as possible. I read the newspaper while eating breakfast, but retain almost nothing because my mind keeps drifting to lunch, to Michael, to the improbable second chance unfolding in my 60s. At 11:30, I'm backing out of my driveway when I notice Mrs. Patterson working in her garden next door. She waves, and I stop to say hello through my open window. "You look particularly lovely today, Ruth," she says, leaning on her rake. "Special occasion?" Mrs. Patterson is 82, sharp as a tack, and has been my neighbor for 15 years. She was Robert's favorite neighbor because she brought us tomatoes from her garden every summer and never once complained when our sprinkler system occasionally sprayed her driveway. "I'm having lunch with an old friend," I tell her. Her eyes light up with interest. "A gentleman friend?" "A very old gentleman friend. We knew each other before I married Robert." "How wonderful!" She claps her dirt-covered hands together, genuinely delighted. "Robert always said you were too young and too beautiful to spend the rest of your life alone. He'd be happy for you." The words hit me unexpectedly, bringing tears to my eyes. Mrs. Patterson knew Robert well enough to speak for him, and hearing her voice his approval feels like a blessing I didn't know I needed. "Thank you," I manage. "That means more than you know." Luigi sits on the corner of Main and Fifth, a family-owned Italian restaurant that's been serving the community for 30 years. The owners, Tony and Maria, retrofitted the entrance with a ramp 5 years ago when Tony's father started using a walker, and they've become my go-to spot for dates with girlfriends or quiet dinners when I don't want to cook. Michael is already there when I arrive, seated at a table near the window, reading what looks like a poetry book. He's wearing a navy blue button-down shirt and khakis, and his hair is neatly combed but still slightly wild in the way I remember. When he sees me approaching, his face lights up with a smile that erases 45 years in an instant. "You beat me here," I say, positioning my wheelchair at the table. "I was nervous," he admits. "Figured it was better to be early and anxious than late and apologetic." Maria appears at our table with menus and her usual warm welcome. "Ruth, so good to see you, honey. And you must be the handsome man she's been telling everyone about." I feel my cheeks burn. "Maria, I haven't been telling everyone." "Sarah called ahead," Maria continues cheerfully, ignoring my embarrassment. "Said to take extra good care of you both. She also said to tell you the minestrone is particularly good today." When Maria leaves us alone, Michael grins at me across the table. "I like your daughter already. Thorough." "Protective," I correct. She's been taking care of me since the stroke, whether I want her to or not. It's hard for her to step back and let me make my own decisions sometimes. Understandable. After Margaret's diagnosis, David and Chris tried to wrap me in bubble wrap. Took months to convince them I could still drive to the grocery store without supervision. We order minestrone for me, chicken parmesan for him, and fall into the easy conversation that surprised me yesterday. There's a comfort level between us that feels both natural and miraculous, like slipping into a favorite sweater you thought you'd lost years ago. "Tell me about the stroke," he says gently, after we've exhausted safer topics like the weather and the restaurant's new dessert menu. "Only if you want to. I know it's personal." I consider deflecting, changing the subject to something less heavy, but Michael is looking at me with genuine interest, not morbid curiosity or polite obligation. He wants to understand this part of my story because it's shaped who I am now. "It happened on a Sunday morning," I begin. "I was making pancakes for Sarah and the girls. They came over every other weekend. I remember reaching for the vanilla extract on the top shelf, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in intensive care, with Sarah holding my hand and crying. The memory is still difficult, but less painful than it used to be. Time has softened the sharp edges of trauma into something more manageable. The doctor said I was lucky. Sounds strange to call a massive stroke lucky, but apparently it could have been much worse. I lost some function on my left side, and my speech was slurred for months. The wheelchair, I gestured down at it, that was supposed to be temporary. Physical therapy was supposed to get me walking again. But it didn't, Michael says. It's not a question. Some days are better than others. I can stand for short periods, transfer from chair to car, walk a few steps with a walker if I'm feeling ambitious. But the doctors finally admitted that this is probably my new normal. The sooner I accepted it, the sooner I could start living again, instead of just waiting to get better. How long did the waiting take? About 1.5 years, 18 months of being angry and frustrated and feeling sorry for myself. Sarah was incredibly patient, but I could see how much it worried her, watching me shrink into someone smaller and more bitter than the mother she'd always known. Michael reaches across the table and covers my hand with his, the same gesture from yesterday. What changed? I think about this carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer. A book, actually. Sarah brought me a memoir written by a woman who became paraplegic after a climbing accident. She wrote about how disability isn't the end of your story, it's just a plot twist. You can let it make you smaller, or you can figure out how to write the next chapters differently but just as meaningfully. Smart woman. Very smart. She also wrote that the worst thing about disability isn't the limitations. It's how other people start treating you like you're made of glass, like you're not quite a real person anymore. That hit home hard. Our food arrives, and we eat slowly, savoring both the meal and the conversation. Michael tells me about Margaret's decline, how Alzheimer's stripped away layers of her personality until she became someone he loved but barely recognized. I tell him about Robert's cancer battle, how we spent his final months planning my future because he was more worried about leaving me alone than about dying. We both loved well, I say eventually. That's something to be grateful for, even though losing them nearly destroyed us. Margaret used to say that love wasn't about never experiencing loss. It was about being brave enough to love again after loss, knowing it might hurt just as much the second time. Wise woman. She was. You would have liked her. I believe this, surprisingly. 3 days ago, the idea of liking Michael's wife would have seemed impossible, a betrayal of my 22-year-old self who spent years hating a woman she'd never met. But sitting here now, I feel only gratitude toward Margaret for loving him well, for giving him 4 decades of happiness and stability. I think Robert would have liked you too, I tell him. He always said I needed more poetry in my life. Is that what I am? You were. Wild, beautiful, sometimes difficult to understand poetry. Robert was prose, clear, dependable, exactly what he appeared to be. Michael considers this, And now, what am I now? I study his face, seeing both the boy I loved and the man he's become. I don't know yet. That's what we're here to figure out. We're finishing lunch when my phone buzzes with a text from Sarah. "How's it going? Should I come by casually to check on you?" I show the message to Michael, who laughs. She really is protective. Terrifyingly so. When I first started using the wheelchair, she tried to move in with me. It took months to convince her I could manage on my own. Should I be worried about meeting her? Probably. She's going to ask you about your intentions, your financial situation, and your medical history. She might also run a background check. All reasonable questions for someone protecting her mother. I'm struck again by his maturity, his understanding that Sarah's concern comes from love rather than interference. The Michael I knew at 23 was charming but self-centered, focused on his own dreams and ambitions. This Michael seems more aware of other people's feelings, more willing to be patient with complications. "Can I ask you something personal?" I say, as we wait for the check. "Anything. Why didn't you ever come back? Even after Margaret died, even after you'd healed from the accident. You could have looked me up, sent a letter, something." He's quiet for a long moment, running his thumb along the rim of his water glass. Honestly, I was terrified. 45 years of wondering what if is safer than finding out the answer might be nothing. And now I'm 68 years old, and I've learned that regret is heavier than fear. The words settle between us like a prayer, simple and profound. Outside, leaves are beginning to turn gold and crimson, and the afternoon light streaming through the restaurant windows makes everything look softer, more forgiving. "I'd like to see you again," he says as we prepare to leave. "Maybe dinner next time, somewhere we can talk without Maria giving us running commentary on our relationship status." I laugh. She means well. I'm sure she does, but I'd prefer to court you without an audience. Court. Such an old-fashioned word, formal and sweet. It makes me feel like a girl again, which is both thrilling and terrifying. "I'd like that," I say. "But Michael, I want to be clear about something. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me. I've worked too hard to be independent again to give that up." "Good," he says firmly. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of either. I want a partner, not a patient." In the parking lot, he helps me with my wheelchair again, his movements now slightly more confident, less hesitant. We're both learning the logistics of my limitations, and it feels like progress. "Thursday night?" he asks, leaning down to my car window. "There's a new seafood place downtown that's supposed to be excellent." Thursday is perfect. But Michael? "Yeah?" "Bring Sarah's list of questions. Might as well get the interrogation over with early." He laughs, and the sound makes my chest warm with possibility. Should I study for it? Definitely. She's very thorough. Driving home, I feel lighter than I have in months. Not the fragile lightness of denial or distraction, but the solid lightness of hope grounded in reality. Michael and I are different people than we were at 22 and 23. We've been shaped by decades of experience, loss, and growth. We can't recapture what we had before because we're not who we were before. But maybe, if we're very careful and very brave, we can create something new, something that honors our history while embracing our present limitations and possibilities, something that acknowledges we're both closer to endings than beginnings, but that endings can be beautiful too if you write them with intention and grace. At home, I find Sarah's car in my driveway and Sarah herself pacing my front porch with the restless energy that means she's been waiting and worrying. "How did it go?" she asks before I'm even out of the car. "You look happy. That's either very good or very concerning." "It went well," I tell her, rolling up the ramp she and Robert installed 3 years ago. "We're having dinner Thursday." "Dinner already? Mom, don't you think you're moving a little fast?" I stop at my front door and look at my beautiful, worried daughter. "Sarah, I'm 63 years old. At my age, moving fast means we might hold hands by Christmas." She laughs despite herself, and I know she'll be okay with this. It might take time, and she'll probably insist on meeting Michael sooner rather than later, but she'll adjust. Sarah has her father's practical heart, but she also has my romantic streak buried underneath all that protective energy. "Tell me everything," she says, following me inside, and I mean everything. So I do. I tell her about lunch, about Michael's questions and patience, about the way he looked at me like I was still worth getting to know. I tell her about Margaret and Robert, about how love doesn't diminish when you find it again, it just takes different shapes. He sounds, she pauses, searching for the right words, he sounds like someone who's learned how to be careful with precious things. That's exactly what he is. "Okay," she says, and I can see her making peace with the idea. But I still want to meet him soon. Thursday dinner, 7 o'clock. You can accidentally drop by around 8:30 to check on me. Accidentally. Very accidentally, with cookies or some other transparent excuse. Sarah grins, and for a moment she looks 12 years old again, plotting elaborate schemes to stay up past bedtime. I like this plan. Should I bring the girls? Absolutely not. Michael's nervous enough about meeting you. Let's not traumatize him with teenagers on the first round. We spend the evening planning strategies for Sarah's accidental visit, and I go to bed feeling surrounded by love in all its various forms. Romantic love with Michael, maternal love with Sarah, the continuing love I care for Robert. My heart feels fuller than it has in years, like a house that's been closed up all winter, suddenly opening its windows to spring air. Thursday can't come fast enough. Thursday arrives gray and drizzling, the kind of October evening that makes you want to light candles and curl up with a good book. I spend longer than usual getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on a wine-colored dress that Sarah bought me last Christmas. It's flattering but not overly formal, sophisticated without trying too hard. The restaurant Michael chose, the Harbor Room, sits along the waterfront in a converted warehouse that's been transformed into something elegant and warm. When I called yesterday to confirm their accessibility, the hostess assured me they have ramps, accessible restrooms, and tables that accommodate wheelchairs comfortably. She also mentioned, with obvious pride, that their lobster bisque has won awards 3 years running. Michael is waiting in the lobby when I arrive, wearing a charcoal gray suit that makes his silver hair look distinguished rather than old. He stands when he sees me, his face lighting up with a smile that makes my stomach flutter like I'm 16 again. "You look beautiful," he says, offering his arm as we follow the hostess to our table. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I tell him, and I mean it. There's something about seeing him dressed up that brings back memories of our formal dates when we were young. Dinner at the one fancy restaurant in town, school dances where he'd wear his father's tie, and I'd spend hours curling my hair. Our table overlooks the water, where boats bob gently at their moorings, and seagulls wheel overhead despite the gray sky. Candles flicker on every table, and soft jazz plays just loudly enough to create atmosphere without drowning out conversation. "This is lovely," I say, settling my wheelchair at the table. "Very romantic." That was the idea, he admits, and I love that he's not trying to pretend this is just a casual dinner between old friends. We order wine, a bottle of Pinot Grigio that the server recommends, and spend the first few minutes just enjoying the ambiance and each other's company. There's less nervousness between us tonight, more of the easy familiarity that comes from choosing to be here rather than stumbling into coincidence. "I have a confession," Michael says as we wait for our appetizers. "I've been reading your articles." I blank, surprised. "My articles?" "From the library newsletter and the literacy advocacy pieces you wrote for the county magazine. Sarah mentioned them when I asked about your work, so I looked them up online." I feel heat rise in my cheeks. Those articles were professional writing, carefully composed and edited, but they were also deeply personal, passionate arguments for the importance of libraries in small communities, reflections on how reading programs can transform lives. That's rather thorough research, I say. I wanted to understand who you became while we were apart. The Ruth I knew at 22 was smart and kind, but these articles, they show someone who's wise, someone who's thought deeply about how to make the world better. His words touched something tender in my chest. After the stroke, I lost confidence in many areas: my physical capabilities, my independence, my attractiveness. But I never doubted my mind or my writing ability, and having Michael recognize and appreciate that part of me feels like coming home. What did you think of the piece about digital literacy for seniors? I ask. Brilliant and necessary. I've been helping some of my neighbors figure out video calling so they can stay connected with family during COVID, and your suggestions about breaking down the process into manageable steps probably saved several relationships. We talk about technology and change, about the challenge of staying current without losing sight of timeless values. Michael tells me about teaching teenagers who could navigate social media with their eyes closed but couldn't write a coherent paragraph. I tell him about elderly patrons who were terrified of computers but became email champions once someone showed them how to connect with distant grandchildren. Our entrees arrive: grilled salmon for me, seafood pasta for him, and we eat slowly, savoring both the food and the conversation. The wine has relaxed us both, and I find myself laughing more freely, gesturing with my hands the way I used to when I was excited about a topic. I missed this, Michael says suddenly, watching me explain my theory about why certain books become classics while others fade into obscurity. Missed what? The way your eyes light up when you're passionate about something. The way you make everything sound fascinating because you genuinely find it fascinating. I'm the same person I always was, I say, though even as I speak, I know it's not entirely true. No, he says thoughtfully, you're more yourself now. Like you've grown into who you were always meant to be. The observation catches me off guard, partly because it's so perceptive, and partly because I think he's right. The stroke forced me to strip away everything non-essential, to focus on what truly mattered. In some ways, becoming disabled made me more whole, more authentic, more willing to embrace both my strengths and my limitations without apology. What about you? I ask. Who did you become while we were apart? He considers this, twirling pasta around his fork with careful precision. Someone who learned that planning for the future is less important than paying attention to the present. Someone who discovered that patience isn't passive, it's active waiting, staying ready for the right moment to act. Is this the right moment? Being here with you? Yes, absolutely. The intensity in his voice makes my breath catch. We're approaching territory that feels both thrilling and dangerous, the space where friendship could transform into something deeper and more complicated. Michael, I begin, then stop. I want to say something about expectations, about being careful with each other's hearts, about the reality that we're both dealing with physical limitations and the emotional residue of long marriages to other people. But before I can find the right words, my phone buzzes with a text. I glance at it automatically, expecting Sarah's accidental check-in, but instead see a message from an unknown number. Is this Ruth Morrison? This is Emma Patterson, your neighbor. There's been an accident. My blood turns to ice. Mrs. Patterson, working in her garden this morning, her bright wave as I left for dinner. 82 years old and so proud of her independence. I'm sorry, I tell Michael, showing him the phone. My neighbor. Go, he says immediately, signaling for the check. Do you need me to drive you? No, I start, then stop. Actually, having support might be helpful, and Michael's offer comes from genuine concern rather than pity or assumption that I can't handle things myself. Yes, I say, thank you, that would be helpful. We leave the restaurant quickly, Michael handling the logistics of payment and valet parking while I call Emma back for details. Mrs. Patterson fell while bringing in her trash cans, possibly broke her hip and is being transported to the hospital by ambulance. Emma found her when she came home from work and heard calling for help. "Should we go to the hospital?" Michael asks as we drive through the dark streets. "Yes, she doesn't have local family, and she's been like a grandmother to Sarah and the girls. Someone should be there." At the hospital, we navigate the maze of emergency department procedures together. Michael helps me manage the logistics of parking and wheelchair accessibility, while I handle the emotional labor of being Mrs. Patterson's emergency contact. It's an odd sort of teamwork for a third date, but it feels natural rather than awkward. Mrs. Patterson looks small and pale in the hospital bed, her usually neat silver hair tangled and her eyes cloudy with pain medication. But she's conscious and alert, and her face brightens when she sees me. "Ruth, dear, you didn't need to come. I'm fine, just a silly fall." "Broken hip isn't silly," I tell her, taking her hand. "And of course I came. Your family." Michael hangs back, understanding that this moment is between Mrs. Patterson and me, but she notices him immediately. "And who is this handsome gentleman?" she asks, her voice stronger now that she has something interesting to focus on. "This is Michael Donnelly," I tell her, "the old friend I mentioned. Michael, this is Mrs. Patterson, the best neighbor anyone could ask for." "Please, call me Eleanor," she says, extending her free hand to Michael. "Any friend of Ruth's is welcome, especially one who brings such nice roses." I look at Michael, confused, and see him blushing slightly. "I may have stopped by a flower shop on the way to dinner," he admits. "They're in your car." Eleanor beams at this, clearly delighted by the romance of it all. "Ruth, you didn't tell me he was courting you properly. Roses for dinner dates. This one's a keeper." "Mrs. Patterson, Eleanor, you should rest," I say, embarrassed but also touched that Michael thought to bring flowers. "Nonsense! I haven't had this much excitement in months. Tell me, Michael, what are your intentions toward our Ruth?" Michael doesn't miss a beat. To treat her like the remarkable woman she is, and to earn the right to spend more time in her company. "Good answer," Eleanor says approvingly. "Ruth deserves someone who appreciates her properly." We stay until Eleanor's son arrives from Grand Rapids, helping with insurance paperwork and making sure she's comfortable. The hip surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and the doctor is optimistic about her recovery, given her overall health and determination. It's almost 11 when we finally leave the hospital, both of us exhausted but oddly energized by the crisis management we've handled together. "I'm sorry about dinner," I say as Michael drives me home. "Not exactly the romantic evening you planned." "Are you kiddin'? I got to see you in action. Competent, caring, taking charge of a difficult situation. It was incredibly attractive." "Attractive?" I laugh. "Most people don't find hospital emergency rooms particularly romantic. Most people don't get to watch the woman they're falling for handle a crisis with such grace and strength." The words hang in the air between us, significant and slightly terrifying. Falling for, present tense, active voice, happening right now. "Michael." "I know," he says quietly. "I know it's soon, and I know we need to be careful. But I also know I'm 68 years old, and I don't want to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel." In my driveway, he helps me get my wheelchair from the car and walks me to the front door. The roses, a dozen white roses tied with a silver ribbon, sit on my kitchen counter where we left them before rushing to the hospital. "Thank you," I say, meaning it for so many things. For dinner, for coming to the hospital, for the roses, for being patient with Eleanor's questions. Thank you for letting me help, for including me in something important to you. We stand there for a moment, two people in their 60s trying to navigate the delicate space between friendship and romance, between caution and possibility. "Can I kiss you goodnight?" he asks, and the formal way he phrases it makes my heart flutter. "Yes," I whisper, and then his hands are cupping my face, and his lips are soft and warm against mine, and 45 years collapse into nothing. He tastes like wine and possibility, like coming home and starting fresh all at once. When we break apart, we're both breathing unsteadily. "Good night, Ruthie," he says, and the nickname sounds like a promise. "Good night, Michael." I watch him drive away before going inside, my lips still tingling from the kiss, my heart full of gratitude and fear and hope, all tangled together. In the kitchen, I put the roses in water and think about how strange life can be, how it can hand you exactly what you need at precisely the moment you've stopped looking for it. Tomorrow, I'll visit Eleanor, check on her recovery, and probably endure Sarah's detailed interrogation about why I came home so late with flowers and a look on my face that apparently broadcasts thoroughly kissed. Tonight, I just want to sit with these roses and remember what it feels like to be courted by someone who sees my wheelchair and my limitations and my complicated history and chooses to bring flowers anyway. Some stories, it turns out, do get second chances, even the ones you thought were finished. Eleanor's surgery goes well, better than expected for someone her age. I spend Friday morning at the hospital, bringing her magazines and the get well cards that Sarah's daughters made after school yesterday. Emma, 15 and suddenly interested in romance since witnessing Michael's rose delivery, interrogates me thoroughly about my boyfriend situation while Eleanor pretends to nap and obviously eavesdrops. "So is he like your first boyfriend from high school?" Emma asked, perched on the edge of Eleanor's hospital bed with the casual confidence of teenagers who believe they understand everything about love. "College," I correct, "and yes, we dated when I was around your age." "That's so romantic, like a movie where people find each other again after decades apart. Are you going to get married?" "Emma," I say, laughing despite my embarrassment, "we've had exactly 3 dates." 3.5, Eleanor corrects, opening her eyes. "Hospital visits count as half dates, and in my experience, when you're over 60, 3 dates is practically engaged." "You're both ridiculous," I tell them, but I'm smiling. Their enthusiasm is infectious, and after 2 years of well-meaning friends telling me I should consider dating again someday, it's refreshing to have people excited about the possibility instead of worried about the complications. Michael calls while I'm driving home from the hospital, his voice warm through the car's Bluetooth system. "How's Eleanor?" "Charming the entire medical staff and planning my wedding, apparently. She asked the physical therapist if he thought you seemed like good husband material." "And what was the verdict?" "Jury's still out. She wants to see how you handle the stress of her recovery process." "Ah, a test. I like Eleanor already." We talk easily as I navigate lunch hour traffic, and I realize this is something I've missed. Having someone to call with small updates about my day, someone who cares about the details of my life, not because they feel obligated, but because they're genuinely interested. "Can I see you this weekend?" he asks as I'm pulling into my driveway. "Nothing fancy, maybe a walk around the lake. I know a path that's completely accessible." "You researched accessible walking paths?" "I researched everything. Restaurants, movie theaters, parks, museums. I want to be able to take you anywhere you want to go." The thoughtfulness of this stops me cold. Not just the research itself, but what it represents. Michael taking my limitations seriously without making them the center of attention, planning for inclusion rather than accommodation. "Sunday afternoon," I suggest, "after I visit Eleanor again?" "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 2. Sunday dawns crisp and bright, the kind of October day that makes Michigan beautiful. The leaves are at peak color, brilliant reds and golds that make the whole world look like it's been touched by magic. I dress in layers, knowing the weather can change quickly by the water, and meet Michael at my front door precisely at 2 o'clock. "You look lovely," he says, offering me his arm as we walk to his car. It's an older model Buick sedan, immaculately maintained, with Michigan disability parking tags hanging from the rearview mirror.